This object, preserved on a stand in the porch of Derry Cathedral, is quite literally a bombshell, one of thousands fired into Derry during the siege by James II's mortars. But this one didn't contain explosive. It had been specially emptied, in fact. What it did contain was written terms on which the besieged were invited to surrender. But it's proved explosive enough in history, because no surrender was the answer the besieged finally gave out.
And no surrender it still is. Then, in 1689, the British ships in the foil, which had all the time felt held back by the wooden boom, finally summoned the courage to try and break through. Facing a continuous barrage from the Catholic Irish armies on the shore, they were watched with mounting excitement by the starving citizens. Triumphantly, the ships headed by the Mountjoy burst through the boom and sailed up with relief supplies to the very walls of Londonderry. And in triumph too, and the sort of grim joy, the hard-pressed citizens flocked down through the gates to greet them.
The siege of Londonderry was over, to become, it seems, until such time as the River Foyle runs dry altogether, a sacred memory for the Protestants of Northern Ireland. But enshrined with that glorious cry of no surrender, the memory too of those British ships in the Foyle that had for so long seemed to lack the courage to come to Derry's aid. In reality, but for the arrival of British help, Derry would have surrendered. In Derry, there were people already negotiating for surrender. But the only reality which history has allowed to count is that Derry did not surrender. That, and the lesson for the Northern Protestant, that however much he may need British aid, he is, in the long run, always on his own. And it's in that sense that, in the minds of many people in Northern Ireland today, the siege of Derry is still not over, though it was raised 3 centuries ago. The raising of the siege was followed within a year by the arrival in Ireland of the Protestant King William III himself, who landed by Carrickfergus Castle near Belfast on June the 14th, 1690. He was soon after to win a great victory at the Battle of the Boyne.
The Boyne finished James II. Next year, the Catholic armies in Ireland totally surrendered. And the triumph of William of Orange at the Boyne, the foundation of that triumph of Protestant over Catholic, the memory of which is still perpetuated by Protestants in Northern Ireland today. The triumph of Orange over Green. It's a memory of triumph which the Protestants of Northern Ireland still need as part of their everyday lives. But why do they still need it? What do William of Orange and the Boyne still mean to them?
What does he mean to me? Well, he's the King of England. He's at the head of the Protestant Church. And I happen to be an Orangeman, so he must mean a lot to me. So I say, as far as I'm concerned, he saved the Protestant people from getting now prosecuted and murdered by Rome. Hippies, as they're called here.
In their history book, Papists are the people on whom the gates of Derry had to be slammed and from whom the relieving ship Mountjoy delivered. People against whom these Protestants still feel they have to defend themselves.
Several wounded, though none of the police were hurt.
One of those wounded was a young man named James Stevens, who'd been one of O'Brien's lieutenants. The mob dispersed, Smith O'Brien himself and Stevens making off into the countryside as best they could, Stevens with a slight wound in the leg.
Such was the so-called Rising of 1848, an event which a later Irish nationalist of the 20th century, Patrick Pearse, was to refer to as one of the 6 occasions in the past 300 years when the Irish nation had asserted its right in arms to national sovereignty and freedom. It's more truthfully known as the Battle of the Widow McCormack's Cabbage Garden.
Whilst to nationalism in Ireland. In 1856, Stevens returned to Ireland, determined to use secret society techniques for Irish national freedom. Every other desire of my soul, he wrote, shrinking into the merest insignificance before this all-absorbing determination. He set out on a 3,000-mile journey, mainly on foot, to try and assess the state of Irish national feeling. There had been a report that Stevens's wound at the Battle of the Widow McCormack's Cabbage Garden was a mortal one, and there'd even been an obituary of him published in a newspaper. There were those who believed him to be a ghost as he tramped the countryside. Other people, less superstitious, regarded him as an impostor. As he passed on his way through towns and villages from which he'd been absent for 8 years, he felt himself at first an isolated figure, and was even sometimes taken for a foreigner in his persistent quest for Irish nationalist ideals, which seemed to have very little reality to the ordinary Irish people of that day. The people, Stevens decided, are in a hopeless state of inactivity. Political life is dead. He'd set out on his walk with one big question in his mind. Was Ireland ready for a secret revolutionary organization under his leadership? In his native Kilkenny, once centre of the Young Ireland movement, Young Ireland was now forgotten.